How to filter data. Now, I might sound like a broken record at this point, and I totally get it, but we really want to solidify those fundamentals. And those fundamentals with querying gear around answering complex questions with queries. And the only way we'll solidify our base of knowledge here is to practice, and reiterate some of the basics that you may have gotten up until now, but elaborate on them as we go along. And so at this point, you may be like, Mo, you've explained to us how filtering works twice. And yes, I have. If we flash back to our very first filter, which is the very first query I showed you, and we saw previously, we can see here that we've already seen how the where clause works. But what if I told you that filtering data can become infinitely more complex as you go along? Because just because you know how to write this clause doesn't mean you've mastered this clause. And that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to master everything to do with SQL. And so when we look at where, we know that a simple filter will be where role equals manager. So we're trying to filter out the roles of a manager. And when we look at this SQL statement, we see the three clauses, the select, the from, the where, and we know what all of these do. We're selecting columns from a table, and then we're filtering where something is happening. All of that solid base that we've built up until now is great. But remember in the previous video where I showed you the ability to filter on multiple criteria? Well, that's where it becomes very interesting, right? Because as our questions become more complex, so do our queries. As our need to create deeper subsets of data grows. Subsets meaning, well, we only want to see a fragment of the data that correlates or is related to the question we're asking. When people ask us questions as SQL ninjas, and they're like, I want to see this, and I want the constraints, I want the filters to look like this, I want to know the salary of these people between these ages and from this gender, or I want to know the salaries of these role descriptions for these age groups, or I want to know the salaries for the people that were hired between this and this date because we're doing a salary review. Things like that become vital. Answering those questions in a way that we can write queries to get the information needed is what we're trying to accomplish here. And I find that when we think of queries like questions, it becomes easier to answer them. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to enable through looking at data is a way to read the data. We don't want to just be able to write queries without an outcome. We want to know what outcome is driving the query. And so when we look at filtering, it is an essential skill when you look at writing queries because it is the base of almost any query, as usually when you're asking a question, you only want to look at a subset, a fraction of that data that relates to the question you're asking. You may be thinking, okay, where is what? Where is the keyword that we use to filter data, right? So when we fire our query and we go to the database, well, this is our original table. But we may only want to filter out the Mo's. And so we're really solidifying that understanding here. But now we want to build on it. I think we all understand now what the where clause is. And we understand that it is a very powerful tool. Now, if I were to ask you the question, get me a list of all the female employees, you would know how to answer this. And let's go into Valentina Studio and just quickly write out that query. So over here, we're in Valentina Studio and we're in the employees database. And if we go look at the employees, we can see here that we see all of the employees in the table. But if we wanted to write a filter against this, we would go into our query view. And here we would say select first name from employees. And then we would say where gender is equal to F. So let's run that back. It looks like the gender is capitalized. So we would need this. And let's execute that now. And now we can see that we have filtered out the first name of every female employee in the company. So with that, we know how to write these simple queries. And we also know how to get that subset of information when our filters are simple. But what if I told you that with the multiple search criteria, which we've tried out, it becomes more and more complex. You can layer your filter. And so over here, what if we wanted to filter by age and gender? That's where we get into more interesting use cases. So let's talk about the and keyword.